Schools face places breaking point. The cost of creating places for the 880,000 extra pupils expected in England by 2023 could push schools to breaking point, council leaders warn. The local government association fears the crunch on school places could soon reach a tipping point with no more space or money to extend schools. The LGA wants the government to fully fund the cost of all the extra places, calculated to run to £12 billion. Ministers said the last Labour government had failed to plan ahead. Official government figures, published last year, project that by 2023 there will be a total of 8,022,000 pupils in England's schools, up from 7,143,000 in the current academic year. Shortfall. The LGA says the cost of creating places for all these pupils could be £12 billion, meaning the government's commitment of £7.35 billion for extra school places leaves a shortfall. As well as more central government funding, it wants councils to be given the powers to open new schools to meet local need without bureaucratic burdens. The association's comments come ahead of Thursday's deadline for the parents of some 370,000 3- and 4-year-olds to apply for school places for their children. It says councils are pulling out all the stops to ensure there is a place for every child. Separate figures from the Labour Party suggest almost 1 in 5 primary schools is already over capacity. The party sent Freedom of Information requests to England's 152 local education authorities. 130 replied. The responses suggested 18% do not have enough capacity for their pupils, with children in over-large classes or temporary makeshift classrooms. Double-decker. These include a primary school in Northumberland that is holding classes in a converted double-decker bus, and another in Bristol that has taken over an old police station. More than 3/4, 78%, of the councils that responded saw a need for additional primary places in the next 3 years, with half saying they would need more secondary places. Councillor David Simmons, chairman of the LGA's Children and Young People Board, said, "We are calling on the government to commit to funding the creation of school places and hand councils the powers to open new schools, for both primary and secondary age pupils, before time runs out." He said councils were trying to create places on time and in the right places but were hampered by red tape and lack of money. Classroom. Schools have faced sharply rising numbers of pupils. The scale of this crisis is too much for council taxpayers to pay for alone. Additionally, much of the decision-making about new school places rests in the hands of the government, whose funding for school places came late. As a consequence, councils are carrying £1 billion worth of costs, which puts pressure on other school services. The government has focused funding for new schools on academies and free schools, which are independent of local authority control. Education choices. Labour says this policy is failing to provide places in areas where they are needed. Shadow Education Secretary Tristram Hunt said parents had a big choice to make at the May election. On education, the choice is this: a Labour Party committed to sensible and pragmatic solutions for overcoming the growing pressures on school places, or David Cameron's irresponsible schools policy that prioritises money for new schools in areas with surplus places. Conservative Education Minister Nick Gibb blamed the crisis on Labour. The last Labour government failed to plan for the future, cutting funding for school places during a baby boom while allowing immigration to get out of control, and they wasted millions of pounds of taxpayers' money on their failed Building Schools for the Future programme. By contrast, this government has dealt with an unprecedented increase in demand for school places by protecting the school budget from cuts, investing an extra £5 billion to create new school places and spending £18 billion to improve school buildings across the country.